Tamanu oil did not become valuable because it improved. It became visible because the system around it changed. For centuries, this oil existed in places that were never designed to scale. It was used quietly, not for beauty, not for luxury, and not for display. It lived inside medical traditions that did not need validation, branding, or approval. And because of that, it remained invisible to the modern world. Then something shifted, not in the oil, but in who was allowed to touch it, extract it, and define its purpose. This story is not about skincare. It is about what happens when a substance crosses a boundary it was never meant to cross.
It became valuable because the world around it shifted, quietly, without permission, and without asking whether it should. For a long time, this oil lived in places that were never designed to scale. It wasn't skincare. It wasn't luxury. It wasn't even a product. It was a substance with a strong smell, a heavy texture, and a stubborn unpredictability, something people used with restraint, not excitement. And because it resisted being packaged into a simple promise, it stayed outside the modern spotlight. Then something changed, not in the oil, but in the system that decided what the oil was allowed to be. This story is not about benefits. It's about boundaries. And what happens when something crosses into a world that demands control? Before products needed permission, before labels, before clinical claims, before dermatologists tested, became a cultural religion, most substances existed without needing to justify themselves. They lived inside closed loops, community loops, family loops, regional loops, where the goal wasn't mass adoption. The goal was function, continuity, and trust built over time. Tamanu oil belonged to that kind of world. In that world, consistency didn't mean identical. It meant familiar enough. It meant, this is what we have, this is what it does, and this is how we respect it. But modern markets don't run on familiar enough. They run on replication. Same bottle, same smell, same texture, same outcome. Every time. That is where the first tension begins. Because the moment you demand that an oil behave the same in every climate, every warehouse, every shelf, and every month of the year, you are no longer asking for an oil. You are asking for a system. And Tamanu was never born inside one. A medicine that didn't want scale. Tamanu wasn't introduced to the world as a beauty ingredient. For generations, it existed as something closer to medicine, used carefully, sometimes sparingly, sometimes with ritual, sometimes with caution. And the difference matters. Beauty markets want repeat use. Medicine traditions often want correct use. They don't need you to apply it every night forever. They need you to understand when it's appropriate, when it's too much, and when to stop. That kind of logic is not compatible with modern consumer growth. A product market asks, how do we make people use this more often? A traditional system asks, how do we make sure people use this correctly? Those are two different worlds. So even if Tamanu worked, even if it had a place, it still wasn't ready for mainstream acceptance. Not because it lacked value, but because it lacked a business model. Systems reject what they can't control. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Modern industries do not reject things because they're ineffective. They reject things because they're uncontrollable. Uncontrollable means the smell is too strong to standardize. The color shifts depending on harvest. The texture varies with storage. The yield changes depending on region. The supply chain is fragile. And the story is too complicated to fit on a label. Tamanu carries all of that. So if you've ever wondered why certain substances stay niche for decades, it's not always because they don't work. It's because they can't be shaped into a predictable commodity without losing something. And the moment a market senses loss, it responds with a familiar solution. Refinement. Not refinement as improvement. Refinement as control. The quiet moment extraction replaced tradition. This is where the transformation happens, and it almost never looks dramatic. There is no announcement, no headline that says, we are about to redefine this oil. Instead, there's a series of silent decisions. Which parts of the process are allowed to remain natural? Which parts must become industrial? Which variables must be eliminated? Which steps must be standardized? And which original qualities must be treated as problems? The oil begins to move through spaces it was never meant to enter. From local handling, to scaling logistics. From direct use, to supply chains. From contextual knowledge, to manufacturing protocols. And in that shift, the meaning changes. What once existed as a thing people used becomes an ingredient, a component, a commodity that must behave. And once an oil is forced to behave, it becomes something else. When skincare became a category, skincare is not just a practice. Skincare is a category. And categories don't simply describe reality. They reorganize it. Once Tamanu is placed inside the skincare category, it inherits a set of expectations. It must be pleasant. It must be stable. It must be compatible with other ingredients. It must be scalable. It must be marketable. It must fit a narrative that people can repeat. This is where many oils become popular. But something else happens too. They become simpler, not necessarily in chemistry, but in meaning. Because the category does not have room for complexity. It has room for a storyline, and storylines sell faster than truth. So the oil becomes a solution, a secret, a holy grail, a miracle. And once that language enters, the original reality becomes irrelevant. What was lost in the transition? Here's the part most people miss. The loss isn't always physical. Sometimes the oil is still real, still derived from the same plant. But what's removed is the environment that gave it dignity. Limitation is removed. Context is removed. Restraint is removed. The oil becomes available everywhere, all the time, and that changes how people relate to it. In older systems, the oil had boundaries. You couldn't treat it like candy. You couldn't consume it like content. But once it becomes a product, the pressure flips. Use it daily. Use it forever. Expect fast results. If it doesn't work, buy a stronger one. And that pressure is not neutral. It shapes the entire ecosystem around the ingredient. Why Tamanu still feels out of place? Even today, Tamanu doesn't fully behave like the ingredients that were born inside modern markets. It still feels heavier, stronger, less cosmetic. And that makes people uncomfortable. Because modern skincare culture is trained to believe. If something is valuable, it must be easy. It must be pleasant. It must be instantly understandable. Tamanu refuses that. It carries the medicine energy of older systems. The sense that it should be respected, not casually consumed. Which is exactly why it gets rebranded again and again. To make it feel safer, more digestible, more cosmetic. But every time that happens, the distance grows between what it was and what it is being forced to become. The pattern repeating again. This is not just a Tamanu story. It's a pattern. A substance exists quietly in a system that doesn't need mass validation. Then modern markets discover it and ask one question. How do we make this behave? Once it behaves, it becomes valuable. Once it becomes valuable, it becomes popular. Once it becomes popular, it becomes simplified. And then one day, people swear it stopped working, without realizing that what stopped working was the relationship. Because the ingredient didn't lose power overnight. The system removed the conditions that made it meaningful. And that's why this was never really about Tamanu oil. It was about what happens when the system becomes the author.